I love the visual folks come up with. Hot dig, man, that's something. Okay. Among other things, I'm trained at what's called narrative analysis, exegesis. That's just meaning taking a passage of text and digging down into the words, and noticing the construction and pulling it apart. I'm trained at tearing apart literature. I'm trained to break things up. And if I'm really good at it, I can sometimes put things back together again. You're going to see how well I do this today. Oh, here's our sixth principle. And it is also printed in your order of service. And we forgot to include the first part, which is we covenant together to affirm and promote. Let's read this. What the heck? All together. We covenant together to affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Now let's start pulling it apart. I want you to notice that the principle does not tell us how to live. It doesn't give us any specifics. It doesn't ground us spiritually. It doesn't even really help us with practical how to be an ethical person. The other principles are also stated values, shared values, but they kind of offer us guidance on how each of us might live well in this world. The sixth principle is a little different. It's a shared goal. It's a shared vision for what we'd like to see in this world. It stands apart from the other principles a little bit in that you really can't do it alone. You can't just go off and sit on your meditation cushion and achieve this vision. The other principles are things that you as an individual, us as a congregation, can actually put into practice, see how it works. But the sixth principle is a goal that we can hold, a vision we can hold, but no one person holds the definition or the directions. I also want us to reflect on how this principle is so American. I know other people in other parts of the world have the very same idea, but this language in this principle is just like straight up from the founders of our republic, some of whom were Unitarians. And those words, liberty and justice for all, hello, straight out of the Pledge of Allegiance. Can you say plagiarism? I'm pointing this out not as a little picky quibble. I want us to observe how this principle is really very deeply rooted in our sense of what it is to be American. Our understanding that the human existence in this world can and should be better. It can be better, and it should be better. We have the conviction that greater peace can only be possible with greater liberty. And that greater peace and greater liberty are really only possible with greater justice. Okay? We carried around the understanding, like what Theodore Roosevelt once observed, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in if it is not a reasonably good place for all of us to live in. That's so American. Okay, enough with the narrative analysis. Let's have some history. A short detour to remember how we wound up with 7 principles in the first place. Okay? There were some other principles that were cast back in about 1960, 1961, when the two denominations, the Unitarians and the Universalists, were preparing to come together to make one new denomination. And they set as a project creating a statement of principles, a upon which this new denomination would be based. And so they set to it, and the whole process was so fraught, so contentious, that it almost blew apart the plans for merger. Just coming upon, what are we going to do together? But maybe like in some other relationships where you fight about something over here so that you can actually get this done. They did finally strike a statement. Here, let me read it for you. The Unitarian Universalist Association is united to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. Did I mention we are people of the word? Many, many, many words. When they got all those words hammered out, everyone was just so exhausted that they just kind of took the principles and put them right there. There, done. And they got on the work with the work of consolidation. And honestly, nobody paid those principles much mind. I certainly never heard them when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. We didn't trot those out every Sunday. And perhaps it's to that end that by the late 1970s, within our movement, there was this growing restlessness and some very earnest people, because if we are nothing, if we are not earnest, attempting to discern what is our center. It's not enough to just state what we don't believe in. We wanted to be able to find something that we could state in the affirmative, in the positive, and not couch it in terms of belief or disbelief, but in what we will affirm and promote. So people went back and they looked at those principles. They blew the dust off. Oh, look at these principles. And as they reviewed them, our non-theists got very itchy over the word God. And our women were really not impressed with the sexist language of love to man. Hello? So very careful work was done, and done to more clearly identify our common aspirations. And this was done grassroots work. This is not just some people in Boston saying, and what shall we all agree upon? No, it was done at the congregational level, over and over, people talking with one another to identify and propose principles that we could affirm and promote. Not just, bottom common denominator, like, well, we mostly agree on this. Bigger than that. The new principles were explicitly written to be genderless and non-theistic, which made them much more palatable to some people and sort of worrisome to some other people. Because as God was removed from the principles, some people felt a little like excluded. So at the same time, they created what were then 5 sources, the 5 sources that inform our tradition and what we draw upon. So God got taken out of the principles and put into the sources. So you'll go find some more theistic sources in our, we'll get those in the order of service soon. April, we got to put the sources in the order of service. Okay. And the cool thing is, this time, after all of this grassroots level work, and it took several years, in 1985, all 7 principles, and at the time 5 sources, were voted on and approved, because we're democratic that way. They were adopted, and unlike the earlier version, as soon as we had them, we ran with them, okay? We put them on bookmarks and on T-shirts and in order of service. And, you cannot go very far in your investigation in Unitarian Universalism without bumping into the 7 principles, right up there. We even went and amended them a little bit now and then. We added a 6th source in our sources to acknowledge earth-based spirituality. And I want you to know that we have some amazingly lively debates every few years about what kind of changes we might want to make to the words, because we are people of the words. For the most part, we really like having our principles. And we put them all over the place. We translate them into simpler language for our children. If you weren't careful, you might think that we were starting to take them as like scripture or creed. And that makes some of us nervous. Creeping creedalism. But that nervousness is probably okay, because honestly, we're not used to being that contented. If too many of us grew contented, there would be some problem here. All right. So that's the background of how we even wound up with the principles. So now that when you read them, I expect that you'll find them to be good words for ethical living. They're good words for us to covenant together, to affirm and promote. I want you to remember, modern people wrote them, and we can rewrite them. They're not scripture. They were not handed down on a stone tablet from above. They're just guides for right now. The principles, however, say very little about the practical, and there's nothing about reverence in the principles. They're ethical statements. They're not a statement of faith, but they do carry an implied theology. What's that? Theology? Yes, because you do have a theology, even if you don't have a supernatural God construct. So what are the underlying theologies of the sixth principle? Well, there's a theology that progress is possible. The theology that people can improve or change. The theology that it is perhaps then the work of humans to seek to improve the world around them. This is echoed in the Hebrew theology, the idea of tikkun olam, repairing the world. I want to show how that theology is very different from some other theologies out there, other theologies that presume that humans are really incapable of change or improvement because they're completely controlled by destiny or deity, right? You've encountered those theologies, right? That's not here. The underlying theology of the sixth principle reminds us that we can believe in good. I bring this up because it's very important to look at the underside of things. How's that going? All right. Why am I preaching on the sixth principle? Because it challenges me to find something meaningful. It's really easy to read the sixth principle as just simply a noble, optimistic platitude. So distant from the everyday that there's really nothing to connect it to my life. If we only read it and see it as a vision in the distance, we run the risk of failing to draw up the maps and pack for the journey. If we only see it as a vision in the distance, it becomes no better than a mirage. If we only look out in the distance ahead, we might lull ourselves into ignoring all of the work that is to be done right around us. We run the risk of holding but a shallow trust in this world. That's what faith is. Trust that there is goodness in this world beyond the self. And we are truly at risk of holding a shallow faith if we only contemplate the goals of the sixth principle without also committing to the work of getting there. That's hard because this is a principle that no one of us can ever undertake alone. It is the work of the community, the world community. And it is work to be done without superheroes or supernatural interventions. But there is so much. Where to begin? I have to remember the teachings of Rabbi Tarfon in the Talmud, who wrote, "It is not incumbent upon you to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to desist from it. This is the work of the whole of the world of which we are a part. We're all in this together." We have to, at the very least, articulate this goal to remind ourselves that we do believe in good, that we do believe that progressive change is possible, and that even if we never see this goal achieved in our lifetime, it is still a worthy goal, a vision to hold up against those who would simply surrender to the weight of their own suffering. It is a worthy vision to hold up against those of greedy desires who would trade our community for short-term gain. This is a vision to hold up, to challenge those who are afraid, fearful of change. So, as I try to be practical, I try to be grounded, I try to be realistic, what is my work towards world, community, peace, liberty, justice? Hey. So I'm reminded that all that any of us can do is what Teddy Roosevelt instructed us. Do what you can with what you have, where you are. The world community is right outside my door. In fact, a whole lot of it is represented by the children at the elementary school just down the street from where I live. Perhaps I could do more to interrupt tribalism and nationalism simply by volunteering to be a mentor, to help refugee children learn how to read. I know about you, but peace for me begins every time I consider how will I treat the other person. Remember, I was trained in how to fight. So peace for me has to be a choice, a decision that I make. It's my preference. It's my work every day. Some days it's more work than others. Liberty and justice, those are multifaceted. Those are very complex because what is freedom for one person will be very stifling for another. And what is justice for one will leave others blinded. So we're going to have to be careful. We're going to have to do the careful work to articulate what is liberty and justice in the whole world community. We have covenanted to affirm and promote this vision. And if we're honest, it's so hard. If we are honest, we do so fully aware that we're going to fail over and over in our journey towards this goal. And as we fail, though, we will reflect and amend our actions, we'll resume the work, ready to fail again, but never ready to let go. We'll stretch to include the whole world community, stretching our hearts to try and understand what constitutes peace. We're going to stretch our ears to hear all who are still aching for liberty. We're going to stretch to see what justice will look like. And then we will resume our work. The work that the Unitarian minister Theodore Parker explained in 1853 when he proclaimed, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." The sixth principle is our shared vision. Our eyes can only reach but little ways. But this is our work. In such an arc we are bending. All of us together. May it be so.